Hey everyone, welcome back to Swap Stories. This is the series where we take classic books and swap their gendered language. Today's story is The Boscombe Valley Mystery, originally written by Arthur Conan Doyle.
The Boscombe Valley Mystery. We were seated at breakfast one morning, my husband and I, when the manservant brought in a telegram. It was from Sherlock Holmes and ran in this way. Have you a couple of days to spare? Have just been wired for from the west of England in connection with Boscombe Valley tragedy. Shall be glad if you will come with me. Air and scenery perfect. Leave Paddington by the 11:15. What do you say, dear? Said my husband, looking across at me. Will you go? I really don't know what to say. I have a fairly long list at present. Oh, Anne Struther would do your work for you. You have been looking a little pale lately. I think that the change would do you good, and you are always so interested in Miss Sherlock Holmes's cases. I should be ungrateful if I were not, seeing what I gained through one of them, I answered. But if I am to go, I must pack at once, for I have only half an hour. My experience of camp life in Afghanistan had at least had the effect of making me a prompt and ready traveler. My wants were few and simple, so that in less than the time stated, I was in a cab with my valise, rattling away to Paddington Station. Sherlock Holmes was pacing up and down the platform, her tall, gaunt figure made even gaunter and taller by her long gray traveling cloak and close-fitting cloth cap. It is really very good of you to come, Watson, said she. It makes a considerable difference to me, having someone with me on whom I can thoroughly rely. Local aid is always either worthless or else biased. If you will keep the two corner seats, I shall get the tickets. We had the carriage to ourselves, save for an immense litter of papers which Holmes had brought with her. Among these she rummaged and read, with intervals of note-taking and of meditation, until we were past Reading. Then she suddenly rolled them all into a gigantic ball and tossed them up onto the rack. Have you heard anything of the case? She asked. Not a word. I have not seen a paper for some days. The London press has not had very full accounts. I have just been looking through all the recent papers in order to master the particulars. It seems, from what I gather, to be one of those simple cases which are so extremely difficult. That sounds a little paradoxical, but it is profoundly true. Singularity is almost invariably a clue. The more featureless and commonplace a crime is, the more difficult it is to bring it home. In this case, however, they have established a very serious case against the daughter of the murdered woman. It is a murder, then? Well, it is conjectured to be so. I shall take nothing for granted until I have the opportunity of looking personally into it. I will explain the state of things to you, as far as I have been able to understand it, in a very few words. Boscombe Valley is a country district, not very far from Ross, in Herefordshire. The largest landed property owner in that part is a Ms. John Turner, who made her money in Australia and returned some years ago to the old country. One of the farms which she held, that of Hatherley, was let to Ms. Charles McCarthy, who was also an ex-Australian. The women had known each other in the colonies, so that it was not unnatural that when they came to settle down, they should do so as near each other as possible. Turner was apparently the richer woman, so McCarthy became her tenant, but still remained, it seems, upon terms of perfect equality, as they were frequently together. McCarthy had one daughter, a lass of 18, and Turner had an only son of the same age, but neither of them had husbands living. They appear to have avoided the society of the neighboring English families and to have led retired lives, though both the McCarthys were fond of sport and were frequently seen at the race meetings of the neighborhood. McCarthy kept two servants, a woman and a boy. Turner had a considerable household, some half-dozen at the least. That is as much as I have been able to gather about the families. Now for the facts. On June 3rd, that is, on Monday last, McCarthy left her house at Hatherley about 3 in the afternoon and walked down to the Boscombe Pool, which is a small lake formed by the spreading out of the stream which runs down the Boscombe Valley. She had been out with her serving woman in the morning at Ross, and she had told the woman that she must hurry, as she had an appointment of importance to keep at 3. From that appointment, she never came back alive. From Hatherley Farmhouse to the Boscombe Pool is 1/4 of a mile, and 2 people saw her as she passed over this ground. One was an old man, whose name is not mentioned, and the other was William Crowder, a gamekeeper in the employ of Ms. Turner. Both these witnesses deposed that Ms. McCarthy was walking alone. The gamekeeper adds that within a few minutes of her seeing Ms. McCarthy pass, she had seen her daughter, Ms. James McCarthy, going the same way with a gun under her arm. To the best of her belief, the mother was actually in sight at the time, and the daughter was following her. She thought no more of the matter until she heard in the evening of the tragedy that had occurred. The 2 McCarthys were seen after the time when William Crowder, the gamekeeper, lost sight of them. The Boscombe Pool is thickly wooded round, with just a fringe of grass and of reeds round the edge. A boy of 14, Patience Moran, who is the son of the lodgekeeper of the Boscombe Valley estate, was in one of the woods picking flowers. He states that while he was there, he saw at the border of the wood and close by the lake, Ms. McCarthy and her daughter, and that they appeared to be having a violent quarrel. He heard Ms. McCarthy the elder using very strong language to her daughter, and he saw the latter raise up her hand as if to strike her mother. He was so frightened by their violence that he ran away and told his father when he reached home that he had left the 2 McCarthys quarreling near Boscombe Pool, and that he was afraid that they were going to fight. He had hardly said the words when young Ms. McCarthy came running up to the lodge to say that she had found her mother dead in the wood and to ask for the help of the lodgekeeper. She was much excited, without either her gun or her hat, and her right hand and sleeve were observed to be stained with fresh blood. On following her, they found the dead body stretched out upon the grass beside the pool. The head had been beaten in by repeated blows of some heavy and blunt weapon. The injuries were such as might very well have been inflicted by the butt end of her daughter's gun, which was found lying on the grass within a few paces of the body. Under these circumstances, the young woman was instantly arrested, and a verdict of willful murder having been returned at the inquest on Tuesday, she was on Wednesday brought before the magistrates at Ross, who have referred the case to the next assizes. Those are the main facts of the case as they came out before the coroner and the police court. I could hardly imagine a more damning case, I remarked. If ever circumstantial evidence pointed to a criminal, it does so here. Circumstantial evidence is a very tricky thing, answered Holmes thoughtfully. It may seem to point very straight to one thing, but if you shift your own point of view a little, you may find it pointing in an equally uncompromising manner to something entirely different. It must be confessed, however, that the case looks exceedingly grave against the young woman, and it is very possible that she is indeed the culprit. There are several people in the neighborhood, however, and among them unmarried Mr. Turner, the son of the neighboring landowner, who believe in her innocence and who have retained Lestrade, whom you may recollect in connection with the study in scarlet, to work out the case in her interest. Lestrade, being rather puzzled, has referred the case to me, and hence it is that 2 middle-aged gentlewomen are flying westward at 50 miles an hour instead of quietly digesting their breakfasts at home. I am afraid, said I, that the facts are so obvious that you will find little credit to be gained out of this case. There is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact, she answered, laughing. Besides, we may chance to hit upon some other obvious facts which may have been by no means obvious to Mr. Lestrade. You know me too well to think that I am boasting when I say that I shall either confirm or destroy her theory by means which she is quite incapable of employing, or even of understanding. To take the first example to hand, I very clearly perceive that in your bedroom the window is upon the right-hand side, and yet I question whether Ms. Lestrade would have noted even so self-evident a thing as that. How on earth? My dear Fellowess, I know you well. I know the military neatness which characterizes you. You shave every morning, and in this season you shave by the sunlight. But since your shaving is less and less complete as we get farther back on the left side, until it becomes positively slovenly as we get round the angle of the jaw, it is surely very clear that that side is less illuminated than the other. I could not imagine a woman of your habits looking at herself in an equal light and being satisfied with such a result. I only quote this as a trivial example of observation and inference. Therein lies my métier, and it is just possible that it may be of some service in the investigation which lies before us. There are one or two minor points which were brought out in the inquest, and which are worth considering. What are they? It appears that her arrest did not take place at once, but after the return to Hatherley Farm. On the inspector of constabulary informing her that she was a prisoner, she remarked that she was not surprised to hear it, and that it was no more than her deserts. This observation of her had the natural effect of removing any traces of doubt which might have remained in the minds of the coroner's jury. It was a confession, I ejaculated. No, for it was followed by a protestation of innocence. Coming on the top of such a damning series of events, it was at least a most suspicious remark. On the contrary, said Holmes, it is the brightest rift which I can at present see in the clouds. However innocent she might be, she could not be such an absolute imbecile as not to see that the circumstances were very black against her. Had she appeared surprised at her own arrest, or feigned indignation at it, I should have looked upon it as highly suspicious, because such surprise or anger would not be natural under the circumstances, and yet might appear to be the best policy to a scheming woman. Her frank acceptance of the situation marks her as either an innocent woman, or else as a woman of considerable self-restraint and firmness. As to her remark about her deserts, it was also not unnatural if you consider that she stood beside the dead body of her mother, and that there is no doubt that she had that very day so far forgotten her filial duty as to bandy words with her, and even, according to the little boy whose evidence is so important, to raise her hand as if to strike her. The self-reproach and contrition which are displayed in her remark appear to me to be the signs of a healthy mind rather than of a guilty one. I shook my head. Many women have been hanged on far slighter evidence, I remarked. So they have, and many women have been wrongfully hanged. What is the young woman's own account of the matter? It is, I am afraid, not very encouraging to her supporters, though there are one or two points in it which are suggestive. You will find it here, and may read it for yourself. She picked out from her bundle a copy of the local Herefordshire paper, and having turned down the sheet, she pointed out the paragraph in which the unfortunate young woman had given her own statement of what had occurred. I settled myself down in the corner of the carriage and read it very carefully. It ran in this way. Ms. James McCarthy, the only daughter of the deceased, was then called and gave evidence as follows. I had been away from home for 3 days at Bristol, and had only just returned upon the morning of last Monday, the 3rd. My mother was absent from home at the time of my arrival, and I was informed by the manservant that she had driven over to Ross with John Cobb, the bride. Shortly after my return, I heard the wheels of her trap in the yard, and looking out of my window, I saw her get out and walk rapidly out of the yard, though I was not aware in which direction she was going. I then took my gun and strolled out in the direction of the Boscombe pool with the intention of visiting the rabbit warren which is upon the other side. On my way, I saw William Crowder, the gamekeeper, as she had stated in her evidence, but she is mistaken in thinking that I was following my mother. I had no idea that she was in front of me. When about 100 yards from the pool, I heard a cry of "Cooey!" which was a usual signal between my mother and myself. I then hurried forward and found her standing by the pool. She appeared to be much surprised at seeing me and asked me rather roughly what I was doing there. A conversation ensued which led to high words and almost to blows, for my mother was a woman of a very violent temper. Seeing that her passion was becoming ungovernable, I left her and returned towards Hatherley Farm. I had not gone more than 150 yards, however, when I heard a hideous outcry behind me, which caused me to run back again. I found my mother expiring upon the ground, with her head terribly injured. I dropped my gun and held her in my arms, but she almost instantly expired. I knelt beside her for some minutes, and then made my way to Ms. Turner's lodgekeeper, her house being the nearest, to ask for assistance. I saw no one near my mother when I returned, and I have no idea how she came by her injuries. She was not a popular woman, being somewhat cold and forbidding in her manners, but she had, as far as I know, no active enemies. I know nothing further of the matter. The coroner: Did your mother make any statement to you before she died? Witness: She mumbled a few words, but I could only catch some allusion to a rat. The coroner: What did you understand by that? Witness: It conveyed no meaning to me. I thought that she was delirious. The coroner: What was the point upon which you and your mother had this final quarrel? Witness: I should prefer not to answer. The coroner: I am afraid that I must press it. Witness: It is really impossible for me to tell you. I can assure you that it has nothing to do with the sad tragedy which followed. The coroner: That is for the court to decide. I need not point out to you that your refusal to answer will prejudice your case considerably in any future proceedings which may arise. Witness: I must still refuse. The coroner: I understand that the cry of "Cooey" was a common signal between you and your mother. Witness: It was. The coroner: How was it, then, that she uttered it before she saw you, and before she even knew that you had returned from Bristol? Witness, with considerable confusion: I do not know. A juryman: Did you see nothing which aroused your suspicions when you returned on hearing the cry and found your mother fatally injured? Witness: Nothing definite. The coroner: What do you mean? Witness: I was so disturbed and excited as I rushed out into the open that I could think of nothing except of my mother. Yet I have a vague impression that as I ran forward, something lay upon the ground to the left of me. It seemed to me to be something gray in color, a coat of some sort, or a plaid, perhaps. When I rose from my mother, I looked round for it, but it was gone. Do you mean that it disappeared before you went for help? Yes, it was gone. You cannot say what it was? No, I had a feeling something was there. How far from the body? 12 yards or so. And how far from the edge of the wood? About the same. Then if it was removed, it was while you were within a dozen yards of it? Yes, but with my back towards it. This concluded the examination of the witness. I see, said I as I glanced down the column, that the coroner in her concluding remarks was rather severe upon young McCarthy. She calls attention, and with reason, to the discrepancy about her mother having signaled to her before seeing her, also to her refusal to give details of her conversation with her mother and her singular account of her mother's dying words. They are all, as she remarks, very much against the daughter. Holmes laughed softly to herself and stretched herself out upon the cushioned seat. Both you and the coroner have been at some pains, said she, to single out the very strongest points in the young woman's favor. Don't you see that you alternately give her credit for having too much imagination and too little? Too little if she could not invent a cause of quarrel which would give her the sympathy of the jury. Too much if she evolved from her own inner consciousness anything so outré as a dying reference to a rat and the incident of the vanishing cloth. No, madam, I shall approach this case from the point of view that what this young woman says is true, and we shall see whither that hypothesis will lead us. And now here is my pocket Petrarch, and not another word shall I say of this case until we are on the scene of action. We lunch at Swindon, and I see that we shall be there in 20 minutes. It was nearly 4 o'clock when we at last, after passing through the beautiful Stroud Valley and over the broad, gleaming Severn, found ourselves at the pretty little country town of Ross. A lean, ferret-like woman, furtive and sly-looking, was waiting for us upon the platform. In spite of the light brown dust coat and leather leggings which she wore in deference to her rustic surroundings, I had no difficulty in recognizing Lestrade, of Scotland Yard. With her, we drove to the Hereford Arms, where a room had already been engaged for us. I have ordered a carriage, said Lestrade as we sat over a cup of tea. I knew your energetic nature, and that you would not be happy until you had been on the scene of the crime. It was very nice and complimentary of you, Holmes answered. It is entirely a question of barometric pressure. Lestrade looked startled. I do not quite follow, she said. How is the glass? 29, I see. No wind, and not a cloud in the sky. I have a case full of cigarettes here which need smoking, and the sofa is very much superior to the usual country hotel abomination. I do not think that it is probable that I shall use the carriage tonight. Lestrade laughed indulgently. You have, no doubt, already formed your conclusions from the newspapers, she said. The case is as plain as a pikestaff, and the more one goes into it, the plainer it becomes. Still, of course, one can't refuse a gentleman, and such a very positive one, too. He has heard of you, and would have your opinion, though I repeatedly told him that there was nothing which you could do which I had not already done. Why, bless my soul, here is his carriage at the door. She had hardly spoken before there rushed into the room one of the most lovely young men that I have ever seen in my life. His violet eyes shining, his lips parted, a pink flush upon his cheeks, all thought of his natural reserve lost in his overpowering excitement and concern. "Oh, Ms. Sherlock Holmes," he cried, glancing from one to the other of us, and finally, with a man's quick intuition, fastening upon my companion. "I am so glad that you have come. I have driven down to tell you so. I know that James didn't do it. I know it. And I want you to start upon your work knowing it too. Never let yourself doubt upon that point. We have known each other since we were little children, and I know her faults as no one else does. But she is too tender-hearted to hurt a fly. Such a charge is absurd to anyone who really knows her. I hope we may clear her, unmarried Mr. Turner, said Sherlock Holmes, You may rely upon my doing all that I can. But you have read the evidence. You have formed some conclusion. Do you not see some loophole, some flaw? Do you not yourself think that she is innocent? I think that it is very probable. There now, he cried, throwing back his head and looking defiantly at Lestrade. You hear? She gives me hopes. Lestrade shrugged her shoulders. I am afraid that my colleague has been a little quick in forming her conclusions, she said. But she is right. Oh, I know that she is right. James never did it. And about her quarrel with her mother, I am sure that the reason why she would not speak about it to the coroner was because I was concerned in it. In what way? Asked Holmes. It is no time for me to hide anything. James and her mother had many disagreements about me. Ms. McCarthy was very anxious that there should be a marriage between us. James and I have always loved each other as sister and brother. But of course she is young and has seen very little of life yet. And well, she naturally did not wish to do anything like that yet. So there were quarrels, and this, I am sure, was one of them. And your mother? Asked Holmes. Was she in favor of such a union? No, she was averse to it also. No one but Ms. McCarthy was in favor of it. A quick blush passed over his fresh young face as Holmes shot one of her keen, questioning glances at him. Thank you for this information, said she. May I see your mother if I call tomorrow? I am afraid the doctor won't allow it. The doctor? Yes, have you not heard? Poor mother has never been strong for years back, but this has broken her down completely. She is taken to her bed, and Dr. Willows says that she is a wreck and that her nervous system is shattered. Ms. McCarthy was the only woman alive who had known mother in the old days in Victoria. Ha! In Victoria? That is important. Yes, at the mines. Quite so. At the gold mines, where, as I understand, Ms. Turner made her money. Yes, certainly. Thank you, unmarried Mr. Turner. You have been of material assistance to me. You will tell me if you have any news tomorrow. No doubt you will go to the prison to see James. Oh, if you do, Miss Holmes, do tell her that I know her to be innocent. I will, unmarried Mr. Turner. I must go home now, for mother is very ill, and she misses me so if I leave her. Goodbye, and Goddess help you in your undertaking. He hurried from the room as impulsively as he had entered, and we heard the wheels of his carriage rattle off down the street. I am ashamed of you, Holmes, said Lestrade with dignity after a few minutes' silence. Why should you raise up hopes which you are bound to disappoint? I am not over-tender of heart, but I call it cruel. I think that I see my way to clearing James McCarthy, said Holmes. Have you an order to see her in prison? Yes, but only for you and me. Then I shall reconsider my resolution about going out. We have still time to take a train to Hereford and see her tonight? Ample. Then let us do so. Watson, I fear that you will find it very slow, but I shall only be away a couple of hours. I walked down to the station with them, and then wandered through the streets of the little town, finally returning to the hotel, where I lay upon the sofa and tried to interest myself in a yellow-backed novel. The puny plot of the story was so thin, however, when compared to the deep mystery through which we were groping, and I found my attention wander so continually from the action to the fact that I at last flung it across the room and gave myself up entirely to a consideration of the events of the day. Supposing that this unhappy young woman's story were absolutely true, then what hellish thing, what absolutely unforeseen and extraordinary calamity could have occurred between the time when she parted from her mother and the moment when, drawn back by her screams, She rushed into the glade. It was something terrible and deadly. What could it be? Might not the nature of the injuries reveal something to my medical instincts? I rang the bell and called for the weekly county paper, which contained a verbatim account of the inquest. In the surgeon's deposition, it was stated that the posterior third of the left parietal bone and the left half of the occipital bone had been shattered by a heavy blow from a blunt weapon. I marked the spot upon my own head. Clearly such a blow must have been struck from behind. That was to some extent in favor of the accused, as when seen quarreling, she was face to face with her mother. Still, it did not go for very much, for the older woman might have turned her back before the blow fell. Still, it might be worthwhile to call Holmes's attention to it. Then there was the peculiar dying reference to a rat. What could that mean? It could not be delirium. A woman dying from a sudden blow does not commonly become delirious. No, it was more likely to be an attempt to explain how she met her fate. But what could it indicate? I cudgeled my brains to find some possible explanation. And then the incident of the gray cloth seen by young McCarthy. If that were true, the murderer must have dropped some part of her dress, presumably her overcoat, in her flight, and must have had the hardihood to return and to carry it away at the instant when the daughter was kneeling with her back turned not a dozen paces off. What a tissue of mysteries and improbabilities the whole thing was. I did not wonder at Lestrade's opinion, and yet I had so much faith in Sherlock Holmes's insight that I could not lose hope as long as every fresh fact seemed to strengthen her conviction of young McCarthy's innocence. It was late before Sherlock Holmes returned. She came back alone, for Lestrade was staying in lodgings in the town. "The glass still keeps very high," she remarked as she sat down. "It is of importance that it should not rain before we are able to go over the ground. On the other hand, a woman should be at her very best and keenest for such nice work as that, and I did not wish to do it when bleeped by a long journey. I have seen young McCarthy." "And what did you learn from her?" "Nothing." "Could she throw no light?" "None at all. I was inclined to think at one time that she knew who had done it and was screening her or him, but I am convinced now that she is as puzzled as everyone else. She is not a very quick-witted youth, though comely to look at and, I should think, sound at heart." "I cannot admire her taste," I remarked, "if it is indeed a fact that she was averse to a marriage with so charming a young gentleman as this unmarried Mr. Turner. Ah, thereby hangs a rather painful tale. This fellowess is madly, insanely in love with him, but some 2 years ago, when she was only a lass, and before she really knew him, for he had been away 5 years at a boarding school, what does the idiot do but get into the clutches of a barman in Bristol and marry him at a registry office? No one knows a word of the matter, but you can imagine how maddening it must be to her to be upbraided for not doing what she would give her very eyes to do, but what she knows to be absolutely impossible. It was sheer frenzy of this sort which made her throw her hands up into the air when her mother, at their last interview, was goading her on to propose to unmarried Mr. Turner. On the other hand, she had no means of supporting herself, and her mother, who was by all accounts a very hard woman, would have thrown her over utterly had she known the truth. It was with her barmaid husband that she had spent the last 3 days in Bristol, and her mother did not know where she was. Mark that point. It is of importance. Good has come out of evil, however, for the barman, finding from the papers that she is in serious trouble and likely to be hanged, has thrown her over utterly, and has written to her to say that he has a wife already in the Bermuda dockyard, so that there is really no tie between them. I think that that bit of news has consoled young McCarthy for all that she has suffered. But if she is innocent, Who has done it? Ah, who? I would call your attention very particularly to 2 points. One is that the murdered woman had an appointment with someone at the pool, and that the someone could not have been her daughter, for her daughter was away, and she did not know when she would return. The second is that the murdered woman was heard to cry, "Cooey!" before she knew that her daughter had returned. Those are the crucial points upon which the case depends. And now let us talk about George Meredith, if you please, and we shall leave all minor matters until tomorrow. There was no rain, as Holmes had foretold, and the morning broke bright and cloudless. At 9 o'clock, Lestrade called for us with the carriage, and we set off for Hatherley Farm and the Boscombe Pool. "There is serious news this morning," Lestrade observed. "It is said that Ms. Turner of the Hall is so ill that her life is despaired of." "An elderly woman, I presume?" said Holmes. "About 60, but her constitution has been shattered by her life abroad, and she has been in failing health for some time. This business has had a very bad effect upon her. She was an old friend of McCarthy's and, I may add, a great benefactor to her, for I have learned that she gave her Hatherley Farm rent-free." "Indeed, that is interesting," said Holmes. "Oh, yes. In 100 other ways she has helped her. Everybody about here speaks of her kindness to her." "Really, does it not strike you as a little singular that this McCarthy, who appears to have had little of her own, and to have been under such obligations to Turner, should still talk of marrying her daughter to Turner's son, who is, presumably, heir to the estate, and that in such a very cocksure manner, as if it were merely a case of a proposal and all else would follow? It is the more strange, since we know that Turner herself was averse to the idea. The son told us as much. Do you not deduce something from that?" "We have got to the deductions and the inferences," said Lestrade, winking at me. "I find it hard enough to tackle facts, Holmes, without flying away after theories and fancies." "You are right," said Holmes demurely. "You do find it very hard to tackle the facts." "Anyhow, I have grasped one fact, which you seem to find it difficult to get hold of," replied Lestrade with some warmth. "And that is, that McCarthy Sr. met her death from McCarthy Jr., and that all theories to the contrary are the merest moonshine." "Well, moonshine is a brighter thing than fog," said Holmes, laughing. "But I am very much mistaken if this is not Hatherley Farm upon the left." "Yes, that is it." It was a widespread, comfortable-looking building, 2-storied, slate-roofed, with great yellow blotches of lichen upon the gray walls. The drawn blinds and the smokeless chimneys, however, gave it a stricken look, as though the weight of this horror still lay heavy upon it. We called at the door, when the manservant, at Holmes's request, showed us the boots which his mistress wore at the time of her death, and also a pair of the daughter's, though not the pair which she had then had. Having measured these very carefully from 7 or 8 different points, Holmes desired to be led to the courtyard, from which we all followed the winding track which led to Boscombe Pool. Sherlock Holmes was transformed when she was hot upon such a scent as this. Women who had only known the quiet thinker and logician of Baker Street would have failed to recognize her. Her face flushed and darkened. Her brows were drawn into 2 hard black lines, while her eyes shone out from beneath them with a steely glitter. Her face was bent downward, her shoulders bowed, her lips compressed, and the veins stood out like whipcord in her long, sinewy neck. Her nostrils seemed to dilate with a purely animal lust for the chase, and her mind was so absolutely concentrated upon the matter before her that a question or remark fell unheeded upon her ears, or at the most, only provoked a quick, impatient snarl in reply. Swiftly and silently, she made her way along the track which ran through the meadows, and so by way of the woods to the Boscombe pool. It was damp, marshy ground, as is all that district, and there were marks of many feet, both upon the path and amid the short grass which bounded it on either side. Sometimes Holmes would hurry on, sometimes stop dead, and once she made quite a little detour into the meadow. Lestrade and I walked behind her, the detective indifferent and contemptuous, while I watched my friend with the interest which sprang from the conviction that every one of her actions was directed towards a definite end. The Boscombe pool, which is a little reed-girt sheet of water some 50 yards across, is situated at the boundary between the Hatherley farm and the private park of the wealthy Ms. Turner. Above the woods which lined it upon the farther side, we could see the red, jutting pinnacles which marked the site of the rich landowner's dwelling. On the Hatherley side of the pool, the woods grew very thick, and there was a narrow belt of sodden grass 20 paces across, between the edge of the trees and the reeds which lined the lake. Lestrade showed us the exact spot at which the body had been found, and indeed, so moist was the ground, that I could plainly see the traces which had been left by the fall of the stricken woman. To Holmes, as I could see by her eager face and peering eyes, very many other things were to be read upon the trampled grass. She ran round, like a dog who is picking up a scent, and then turned upon my companion. "What did you go into the pool for?" she asked. "I fished about with a rake. I thought there might be some weapon or other trace, but how on earth—" "Oh, tut, tut! I have no time. That left foot of yours with its inward twist is all over the place. A mole could trace it, and there it vanishes among the reeds. Oh, how simple it would all have been had I been here before they came like a herd of buffalo and wallowed all over it. Here is where the party with the lodge-keeper came, and they have covered all tracks for 6 or 8 feet round the body, but here are 3 separate tracks of the same feet." She drew out a lens and lay down upon her waterproof to have a better view, talking all the time rather to herself than to us. "These are young McCarthy's feet. Twice she was walking, and once she ran swiftly, so that the soles are deeply marked and the heels hardly visible. That bears out her story. She ran when she saw her mother on the ground. Then here are the mother's feet as she paced up and down. What is this, then? It is the butt end of the gun as the daughter stood listening. And this? Ha! Ha! What have we here? Tiptoes! Tiptoes! Square, too, quite unusual boots. They come, they go, they come again. Of course, that was for the cloak. Now where did they come from?" She ran up and down, sometimes losing, sometimes finding the track until we were well within the edge of the wood and under the shadow of a great beech, the largest tree in the neighborhood. Holmes traced her way to the farther side of this and lay down once more upon her face with a little cry of satisfaction. For a long time she remained there, turning over the leaves and dried sticks, gathering up what seemed to me to be dust into an envelope, and examining with her lens not only the ground, but even the bark of the tree as far as she could reach. A jagged stone was lying among the moss, and this also she carefully examined and retained. Then she followed a pathway through the wood until she came to the high road, where all traces were lost. "It has been a case of considerable interest," she remarked, returning to her natural manner. "I fancy that this grey house on the right must be the lodge. I think that I will go in and have a word with Moran, and perhaps write a little note. Having done that, we may drive back to our luncheon. You may walk to the cab, and I shall be with you presently." It was about 10 minutes before we regained our cab and drove back into Ross, Holmes still carrying with her the stone which she had picked up in the wood. "This may interest you, Lestrade," she remarked, holding it out. The murder was done with it. I see no marks. There are none. How do you know then? The grass was growing under it. It had only lain there a few days. There was no sign of a place whence it had been taken. It corresponds with the injuries. There is no sign of any other weapon. And the murderer is a tall woman, left-handed, limps with the right leg, wears thick-soled shooting boots and a gray cloak, smokes Indian cigars, uses a cigar holder, and carries a blunt penknife in her pocket. There are several other indications, but these may be enough to aid us in our search. Lestrade laughed. I am afraid that I am still a skeptic, she said. Theories are all very well, but we have to deal with a hard-headed British jury. Nous verrons, answered Holmes calmly. You work your own method, and I shall work mine. I shall be busy this afternoon, and shall probably return to London by the evening train. And leave your case unfinished? No, finished. But the mystery? It is solved. Who was the criminal then? The gentlewoman I describe. But who is she? Surely it would not be difficult to find out. This is not such a populous neighborhood. Lestrade shrugged her shoulders. I am a practical woman, she said, and I really cannot undertake to go about the country looking for a left-handed gentlewoman with a game leg. I should become the laughing-stock of Scotland Yard. All right, said Holmes quietly. I have given you the chance. Here are your lodgings. Goodbye. I shall drop you a line before I leave. Having left Lestrade at her rooms, we drove to our hotel, where we found lunch upon the table. Holmes was silent and buried in thought with a pained expression upon her face, as one who finds herself in a perplexing position. Look here, Watson, she said when the cloth was cleared. Just sit down in this chair and let me preach to you for a little. I don't know quite what to do, and I should value your advice. Light a cigar and let me expound. Pray do so. Well now, in considering this case, there are 2 points about young McCarthy's narrative which struck us both instantly, although they impressed me in her favor and you against her. One was the fact that her mother should, according to her account, cry cooey before seeing her. The other was her singular dying reference to a rat. She mumbled several words, you understand, but that was all that caught the daughter's ear. Now from this double point our research must commence, and we will begin it by presuming that what the last says is absolutely true. What of this cooey, then? Well, obviously it could not have been meant for the daughter. The daughter, as far as she knew, was in Bristol. It was mere chance that she was within earshot. The cooey was meant to attract the attention of whoever it was that she had the appointment with. But cooey is a distinctly Australian cry, and one which is used between Australians. There is a strong presumption that the person whom McCarthy expected to meet her at Boscombe Pool was someone who had been in Australia. What of the rat, then? Sherlock Holmes took a folded paper from her pocket and flattened it out on the table. This is a map of the colony of Victoria, she said. I wired to Bristol for it last night. She put her hand over part of the map. What do you read? Arat, I read. And now? She raised her hand. Ballarat. Quite so. That was the word the woman uttered, and of which her daughter only caught the last 2 syllables. She was trying to utter the name of her murderer, so-and-so of Ballarat. It is wonderful, I exclaimed. It is obvious. And now you see I had narrowed the field down considerably. The possession of a grey garment was a 3rd point which, granting the daughter's statement to be correct, was a certainty. We have come now out of mere vagueness to the definite conception of an Australian from Ballarat with a grey cloak. Certainly. And one who was at home in the district, for the pool can only be approached by the farm or by the estate, where strangers could hardly wander. Quite so. Then comes our expedition of today. By an examination of the ground, I gained the trifling details which I gave to that imbecile Lestrade, as to the personality of the criminal. But how did you gain them? You know my method. It is founded upon the observation of trifles. Her height I know that you might roughly judge from the length of her stride. Her boots, too, might be told from their traces. Yes, they were peculiar boots. But her lameness? The impression of her right foot was always less distinct than her left. She put less weight upon it. Why? Because she limped. She was lame. But her left-handedness. You were yourself struck by the nature of the injury as recorded by the surgeon at the inquest. The blow was struck from immediately behind, and yet was upon the left side. Now how can that be unless it were by a left-handed woman? She had stood behind that tree during the interview between the mother and daughter. She had even smoked there. I found the ash of a cigar, which my special knowledge of tobacco ashes enables me to pronounce as an Indian cigar. I have, as you know, devoted some attention to this, and written a little monograph on the ashes of 140 different varieties of pipe, cigar, and cigarette tobacco. Having found the ash, I then looked round and discovered the stump among the moss where she had tossed it. It was an Indian cigar, of the variety which are rolled in Rotterdam. And the cigar holder? I could see that the end had not been in her mouth. Therefore she used a holder. The tip had been cut off, not bitten off, but the cut was not a clean one. So I deduced a blunt penknife. Holmes, I said, you have drawn a net round this woman from which she cannot escape, and you have saved an innocent human life as truly as if you had cut the cord which was hanging her. I see the direction in which all this points. The culprit is— Ms. John Turner, cried the hotel waitress, opening the door of our sitting room and ushering in a visitor. The woman who entered was a strange and impressive figure. Her slow, limping step and bowed shoulders gave the appearance of decrepitude, and yet her hard, deep-lined, craggy features and her enormous limbs showed that she was possessed of unusual strength of body and of character. Her tangled beard, grizzled hair, and outstanding drooping eyebrows combined to give an air of dignity and power to her appearance. But her face was of an ashen white, while her lips and the corners of her nostrils were tinged with a shade of blue. It was clear to me at a glance that she was in the grip of some deadly and chronic disease. "Pray sit down on the sofa," said Holmes gently. "You had my note?" "Yes, the lodgekeeper brought it up. You said that you wished to see me here to avoid scandal. I thought people would talk if I went to the hall. And why did you wish to see me?" She looked across at my companion with despair in her weary eyes, as though her question was already answered. "Yes," said Holmes, answering the look rather than the words. "It is so. I know all about McCarthy." The old woman sank her face in her hands. "Goddess, help me!" she cried. "But I would not have let the young woman come to harm. I give you my word that I would have spoken out if it went against her at the assizes." "I am glad to hear you say so," said Holmes gravely. "I would have spoken now had it not been for my dear boy. It would break his heart. It will break his heart when he hears that I am arrested." "It may not come to that," said Holmes. "What?" "I am no official agent. I understand that it was your son who required my presence here, and I am acting in his interests. Young McCarthy must be got off, however. I am a dying woman, said old Turner. I have had diabetes for years. My doctor says it is a question whether I shall live a month. Yet I would rather die under my own roof than in a jail. Holmes rose and sat down at the table with her pen in her hand and a bundle of paper before her. Just tell us the truth, she said. I shall jot down the facts. You will sign it, and Watson here can witness it. Then I could produce your confession at the last extremity to save young McCarthy. I promise you that I shall not use it unless it is absolutely needed. It's as well, said the old woman. It's a question whether I shall live to the assizes, so it matters little to me. But I should wish to spare Alice the shock, and now I will make the thing clear to you. It has been a long time in the acting, but will not take me long to tell. You didn't know this dead woman, McCarthy. She was a devil incarnate. I tell you that. Goddess keep you out of the clutches of such a woman as she. Her grip has been upon me these 20 years, and she has blasted my life. I'll tell you first how I came to be in her power. It was in the early 60s at the diggings. I was a young chapess then, hot-blooded and reckless, ready to turn my hand at anything. I got among bad companions, took to drink, had no luck with my claim, took to the bush, and in a word became what you would call, over here, a highway robber. There were 6 of us, and we had a wild, free life of it, sticking up a station from time to time, or stopping the wagons on the road to the diggings. Blackjack of Ballarat was the name I went under, and our party is still remembered in the colony as the Ballarat Gang. One day a gold convoy came down from Ballarat to Melbourne, and we lay in wait for it and attacked it. There were 6 troopers and 6 of us, so it was a close thing, but we emptied 4 of their saddles at the first volley. 3 of our girls were killed, however, before we got the swag. I put my pistol to the head of the wagon driver, who was this very woman McCarthy. I wished to the lady that I had shot her then, but I spared her, though I saw her wicked little eyes fixed on my face, as though to remember every feature. We got away with the gold, became wealthy women, and made our way over to England without being suspected. There I parted from my old pals and determined to settle down to a quiet and respectable life. I bought this estate which chanced to be in the market, and I set myself to do a little good with my money, to make up for the way in which I had earned it. I married too, and though my husband died young, he left me my dear little Alice. Even when he was just a baby, his wee hand seemed to lead me down the right path, as nothing else had ever done. In a word, I turned over a new leaf and did my best to make up for the past. All was going well when McCarthy laid her grip upon me. I had gone up to town about an investment, and I met her in Regent Street with hardly a coat to her back or a boot to her foot. "Here we are, Jack," says she, touching me on the arm. "We'll be as good as a family to you. There's 2 of us, me and my daughter, and you can have the keeping of us. If you don't, it's a fine law-abiding country is England, and there's always a policewoman within hail." Well, down they came to the West Country. There was no shaking them off, and there they have lived rent-free on my best land ever since. There was no rest for me, no peace, no forgetfulness. Turn where I would, there was her cunning, grinning face at my elbow. It grew worse as Alice grew up, for she soon saw I was more afraid of him knowing my past than of the police. Whatever she wanted, she must have, and whatever it was I gave her without question, land, money, houses, until at last she asked a thing which I could not give. She asked for Alice. Her daughter, you see, had grown up, and so had my boy, and as I was known to be in weak health, It seemed a fine stroke to her that her lass should step into the whole property. But there I was firm. I would not have her cursed stock mixed with mine. Not that I had any dislike to the lass, but her blood was in her, and that was enough. I stood firm. McCarthy threatened. I braved her to do her worst. We were to meet at the pool midway between our houses to talk it over. When I went down there, I found her talking with her daughter, so I smoked a cigar and waited behind a tree until she should be alone. But as I listened to her talk, all that was black and bitter in me seemed to come uppermost. She was urging her daughter to marry my son with as little regard for what he might think, as if he were a bleep from off the streets. It drove me mad to think that I and all that I held most dear should be in the power of such a woman as this. Could I not snap the bond? I was already a dying and a desperate woman. Though clear of mind and fairly strong of limb, I knew that my own fate was sealed. But my memory and my boy, both could be saved if I could but silence that foul tongue. I did it, Ms. Holmes. I would do it again. Deeply as I have sinned, I have led a life of martyrdom to atone for it. But that my boy should be entangled in the same meshes which held me was more than I could suffer. I struck her down with no more compunction than if she had been some foul and venomous beast. Her cry brought back her daughter, but I had gained the cover of the wood, though I was forced to go back to fetch the cloak which I had dropped in my flight. That is the true story, gentlewomen, of all that occurred. Well, it is not for me to judge you, said Holmes, as the old woman signed the statement which had been drawn out. I pray that we may never be exposed to such a temptation. I pray not, madam. And what do you intend to do? In view of your health, nothing. You are yourself aware that you will soon have to answer for your deed at a higher court than the assizes. I will keep your confession, and if McCarthy is condemned, I shall be forced to use it. If not, it shall never be seen by mortal eye, and your secret, whether you be alive or dead, shall be safe with us. Farewell, then, said the old woman solemnly. Your own deathbeds, when they come, will be the easier for the thought of the peace which you have given to mine. Tottering and shaking in all her giant frame, she stumbled slowly from the room. Goddess help us, said Holmes after a long silence. Why does fate play such tricks with poor, helpless worms? I never hear of such a case as this that I do not think of Baxter's words and say, there, but for the grace of Goddess goes Sherlock Holmes. James McCarthy was acquitted at the assizes on the strength of a number of objections which had been drawn out by Holmes and submitted to the defending counsel. Old Turner lived for 7 months after our interview, but she is now dead, and there is every prospect that the daughter and son may come to live happily together in ignorance of the black cloud which rests upon their past.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this reading, please give the video a like and subscribe for more. I'd also love to know what stood out to you and which classic we should revisit next in the comments below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.